In the dimly lit corridors of the unexplained, we follow Karin Wilkinson, a woman ensnared in a lifetime of alien abductions. But her story takes an unforeseen twist, leading her deep into top-secret military facilities, where she becomes a pawn in a clandestine breeding program. Tonight, we unravel the layers of Karin's reality, where the ordinary collides with the extraordinary in the unsettling terrain of the unknown. Suspend all disbelief, for you are listening to the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast, where your open-minded host, Mystic Mark, entertains all perspectives in an effort to understand the esoteric, the uncanny, and the damned. Thank you for tuning in. Now enjoy this conversation with Karin Wilkinson.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, here we are back again on the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast, and I am so excited to have this guest on today. She has endured a lifetime of incredible circumstances, both bad and good, and today we're here to talk about her book, Stolen Seed, Evil Harvest. Karin Wilkinson joins me on the podcast today. Karin, it's such a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for being here. How are you today?
Hi, Mark. Thank you for having me. I'm just so thrilled to be here with you today and love your show and love being here with you. So thank you so much.
No, thank you. And, let's get right into it. Obviously, you have a new book out. This is your first book, Stolen Seed, Evil Harvest, and it comes with a lifetime of experiences. But before we talk about some of the experiences, tell us about the power or the shift that occurred that allowed you to write this book, because I understand you're under, some pretty sinister forces before.
Yeah, before I wrote this book. Yeah, exactly. It was a really crazy thing that happened. Some people think it might have happened on purpose. I personally have no idea, so I don't care to put one way or the other, but I had what I call a near-life experience. Some people call a near-death experience, but for me, it was closer to life than death because it really renewed my life in a lot of ways. I was having surgery and in the operating room, but it wasn't hooked up to anything yet. It wasn't on any monitors. It wasn't I'd had a lot of surgeries before, so it wasn't unusual for me to just be hanging out in the operating room before I had any kind of anesthesia, because I wasn't nervous about it. It's common, but it was a pretty big surgery. And an anesthesiologist came in and she leaned over me. And the one thing I noticed is her white lab coat had a pocket that was just full of syringes. And she pulled one out and popped it into my IV port and said, "Here's your sedative," and then walked away. And she didn't wait and say, "How's that feel? That okay? How are you doing?" Nothing. She just turned on her heel and walked away. And she gave me a paralytic, and I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I panicked. There was no one there I could who to see it. And there were some nurses kind of walking around on the other side of the room, but they weren't paying attention to me. And so it was like drowning. It was like drowning, but not in the water. And I was suffocating. I couldn't get anyone's attention, and I knew I was dying. And I'm like, God, what do I do? And as soon as I said that, I heard an audible voice in my head that said, "It's okay. You can let go now." And I was, in a blink of an eye, in an instant, just out of my body and watching everything going on. I could see through the walls into the other rooms. I could see the doctor getting all the instrumentation and stuff ready for my surgery, because I was having more metal rods and things put in my back. And one of the nurses looked at another nurse and said, "Is she having an allergic reaction?" I must have been turning blue. I didn't notice my own color, and more noticed them. And they realized I wasn't breathing and went to get the doctor. And he ran in and he was yelling, bag her. And eventually they ended up intubating me and getting me breathing again. But during that time, I just had the most amazing experience. I felt love and peace beyond anything you can imagine. We don't have any way to describe it. I mean, I cannot describe how peaceful I felt. The amount of love that I felt was just, there's just no way to describe it. I
Now,
was still me. That
now
was what
that
struck me the most. I'm thinking, I'm still me. I can see and hear and everything without a body. Physics and time didn't pass the way it does
so
for us here.
you're out of your body. Your
Yep.
physical body is in the operating room or in this hospital bed.
Mm-hmm.
And did you realize immediately that you're out of body? What was like your
Mm-hmm. Oh
first
yeah.
sense of?
Immediately I realized I'm out of my body, and it felt like I was kind of back into a corner, but not really, because there's no corner. You know what I mean? I was just
Yeah.
observing from kind of in the room, but I stayed close to my body, my spiritual being, and I knew that I just instinctively knew, stay close to your body. So I did. I stayed very close to my body, but I was above it and over to what would have been my left side of my body, and watching everything, and the watching everyone just do everything and try to revive me. And during that time, I had a stroke. I lost the use of most of the right side of my body. I still don't have a lot of, a lot of times I'll smile and stuff and you won't see the right side of my face move. People are like, does that mean she's lying? Her face isn't moving. I'm like, no, I had a stroke. So, you can tell. But it was just the most amazing thing. And I, afterwards, I had some PTSD therapy, and that actually, because it was such a traumatic event, the part where I was suffocating, and I couldn't have anybody touch my neck. Anything that was around me, I just felt like I was not going to be able to breathe. I was panicking all the time. That PTSD therapy helped me deal with my lifetime of the alien abduction that I had been going through and all the things that had happened to me, because it was such an intense a way to deal with really intense emotions and feelings and things that were just really hard to deal with. And that's what started me down the road to being able to deal with all of this. I mean, I always had the memories, they were always there. I could never look outside at night. I couldn't go outside at night alone. I had all these crazy irrational fears that no one could understand and I couldn't talk about, because you don't go and say, well, it's because I've been abducted my whole life. People will look at you like you're crazy, right? Um, and like you say, your family thinks you're crazy. Yeah, try, this one on it. But it helped me to just be able to deal with it. And then, and really renewed my faith as well. And then that gave me the courage and the inspiration to just start talking. And I started talking to L.A. Marzulli. I decided God just made it so that he was in a place that I could get to. He sat down and talked to me. He didn't even know me. And that just one thing led to another. It was just really, part of God's plan. And that's how it happened.
It's amazing. Now, I mean, I imagine, and I don't know this, so please inform us, that these abductions were so traumatic that maybe you blocked them out. I mean, just based on what you're saying, like how much of what you experienced throughout, because your first abduction experience happened when you were very young, right? So this is
Right.
something that had been going on your entire life. Were you consciously aware of these experiences? Did you kind of, not like, were you confused about them? Did they seem like dreams, or have you always known like this is something real that's happening to me and I can't talk about it? Like, take us through that.
Yeah. Obviously I don't know what I don't remember. I'm
Mm.
sure there are events and abduction events that I still have blocked out. Your mind is funny that way. God has that kind of built-in protection for us when he knows it's more than we can deal with. I really think that's where that comes into play. But no, they've always been very different from a dream. It's always been a very real tactile experience where I've come back with scars or pajamas on inside out or different things happening. It's nothing like a dream. It's just as real as me sitting here, at this table and this desk and talking to you. Um, from as young as I can remember. And it had to have started extremely young because it's hard to have memories when you're 2, 3 years old. But I remember being about that young and being terrified of my father's side of the family because they were very tall, blonde, fair skinned, fair eyed people. And they looked a lot like the Nordic type aliens that I had already encountered. And a small child doesn't make those differentiations that, well, the Nordics' eyes are bigger, they're taller, they're, different. It's just similar enough. If a kid's afraid of a bee, they're probably going to be afraid of a fly and other things too. You're not intelligent enough or old enough to make those discernments. So, as young as I can remember, it was very, very real. I mean, from as little as I can remember, I was looking for places to hide at night. I remember one story I tell people often is I thought if I could find a big enough suitcase and get in it and zip it up and get it under the bed, that maybe that would be enough layers, of hiding that they couldn't find me. They'll never look there, And then one of my siblings said, "Oh no, they can see through everything. That it doesn't matter where you hide." So obviously that sibling had some experiences too, but I don't speak for any family members who haven't come forward because that's their story to tell if they want to remember and if they want to tell it. So, but yeah, since I was very young, and they were very real experiences, very real.
Wow. Now, without identifying anyone in your family, you have confirmation that they also have had these experiences, right?
Yeah, there are
Imagine
other
you're like,
family members who've also had experiences. Yes.
wow, wow, and that's something we hear from these reports that there seems to be a genetic relationship or a bloodline familial connection somehow that people who experience these things, their parents or grandparents have a higher
Yes.
probability of having experienced it too. So wow,
Yeah.
and I imagine that would make for a tough situation growing up if they were also blocking out those situations because they wouldn't want to open up and talk about it, especially with
Right.
someone who their own child, right? I mean, that's probably
Right.
layers of difficulty there.
Layers of difficulty. And also, not everyone remembers as much as I did. There was something different about me from the time I was little, and they noted it, these entities, because sorry, my cat, I don't hope you can't hear that in the background. I've got a cat who's yelling at me for attention. But these entities noted it because I was remembering more than they wanted me to. And I was trying to talk about it as well. And they have a ability to block memories or give you what's called screen memories. So when something is going on, you actually think you're seeing something else, like having a set of VR goggles on would do for you. Or maybe it looks like you're in a nice meadow and there's butterflies flying around, but really you're in an observation room on a steel table and they're doing medical things. So they have that ability. But for some reason, it didn't always work on me. There was something very different about me, and not just me. I think that applies to other people who've remembered as well, who remember more. There's just some of us who it just their tricks didn't work as well. So I tried to talk about it, but we didn't also have the vocabulary for it back then. I mean, we're talking in the 60s and 70s. There weren't all the movies and books and TV shows and podcasts and things like that. They weren't government panels and stuff. There might have been like Project Blue Book and things like that. But as far as that goes, aside from like Roswell and stuff like that, it wasn't mainstream. People didn't talk about it. And also back then, if something weird was going on in your family, you certainly didn't talk about it. It was still in that kind of 1950s, let's all appear perfect on the surface mode.
Keeping up with the
So,
Jones, yep.
exactly, exactly. You don't want to be the family with something freaky going on. So, um, I didn't even know how to describe. I didn't know who they were, let alone what they were and why it was happening. And honestly, from a little kid's point of view, when it's always been happening, you kind of think it's just normal.
Mm.
And maybe this happens to most people, but we're just not supposed to talk about it. And they did show me, I was really young, 5 or 6 years old, my family being decapitated in front of me, like a screen memory thing. It looked and felt very, very real, but it wasn't real. And I knew it wasn't real. But they were like, this is what is going to happen if you talk. We can do this and we can take, we can hurt your family. We can kill your family members at any time. You can't talk about this. And a little kid is like, what? Okay, so I was quiet, and when I was about 6 years old, I kind of had a breakdown. And they found me in a bathroom stall and at school, just huddled in a corner. And I just kind of had it. I think that's when the break kind of happened. And it's like, I'm going to keep that stuff over here and life over there. And I'm not going to mix the two up anymore because that stuff's too hard to deal with. And it was that point at which I was able to have a double life. And that's kind of where I kept it until recently, until I was able to talk about it.
Yeah. Now, I've heard about this sort of from different perspectives and even in different, situations, this fracturing of consciousness where, your mind splits in order to save a part of it from the trauma that the other part of it is kind of like sacrificing itself to endure. Is that what you're describing essentially? Is you sort of split your consciousness to try to not understand, but to try to not fall to these traumatic experiences that were such a visceral part of your mind at that young age, right?
Yeah, I guess it was kind of like that. I mean, I didn't split into two personalities, but what I did was I just learned how to I could ignore what was going on if I didn't like it
Mm.
and just let my mind go somewhere else
Okay.
and allow myself not to think or feel or react or interact if I didn't want to. So I really learned how to just go within myself if I had to, when I wanted to, when I had to. So for anything difficult, that's what I did. It made me kind of an introverted. I always said I'm an extroverted introvert because,
Mm.
I as I got older, I really liked talking to people. I realized I really liked people, but my whole life I was so introverted because of that I wasn't quite sure how, So, um, but you find a way to manage it without losing it completely.
Mm.
It affected me in many, many ways.
Now,
Many.
around that age, behavioral psychologists or whoever studies this kind of thing, they say that children typically start to lose a lot of those extrasensory abilities. They start to talk less about these sort of extraordinary experiences.
Mhm.
Obviously, children generally aren't getting abducted, and thank God, but children, for the most part, at that age, do have really strange experiences, your precognition and other weird things. Do you
Mhm.
think this played into it at all as you got to that age? Like maybe your mind was changing, you're becoming more of an adult, and maybe like how did that play into it?
I'm not sure. I mean, I always had this, not always, but as I got older, I realized I had a great deal of what you might call sensitivity, where I knew when something was going to happen. I knew when someone was going to call. I could tell what people were thinking. I knew, things other people didn't know. Some people call it ESP or, extrasensory perception, what have you. I had a great deal of that. And I was dabbled in all kinds of other um, things because of that. I could read people's cards. I could lay out cards to tell people what happened in their past, what was going on in their present, and what was going to happen in their future. These are things the Bible tells us you don't mess with. I didn't know any better. I just knew that I could, and I didn't know how I was doing it.
Mm,
But I know that it had something to do with what they were doing and that they were encouraging those activities in me.
right.
And so I was, and it's not like I went out there and advertised myself as someone who did that. Honestly, I didn't want people to know really that I could do it. But there were times when I just did it. I just read someone's cards
Mm,
or told someone about a past loved one or things like that. Those are no-nos, and that's opening doors and inviting in entities that we do not want to mess with, because you don't know what you're getting when you're getting something from a spiritual realm. they don't come up and say, hi, I'm one of the good ones or I'm one of the bad
Right.
ones. It doesn't work that way.
And even if they did, would you trust them?
You can't. No, exactly. And that's human nature too, right? If
Right.
someone comes up to you and says, hey, let me hold your purse for you. I promise I'm a good guy. You know, you don't
Well,
just believe him.
right. And I think, with these entities, especially, invisible, entities that don't want to show themselves, it's like, why would you inherently trust something like that? Now, I wonder if there's a part of this force, and I want to get into the aliens, how whatever they are and whatever they represent, but this force that is, what we'll call aliens, I wonder if they're targeting people like yourself who have, maybe, these door opening potentials that the Bible warns us against because of this very reason, that these entities are going to then come and, mess with us because we're sort of putting that beacon out there.
Right. Yeah, I think it's a couple of different things. One, I think it's when someone gives that permission, I mean, everything in the spiritual realm, whether benevolent or malevolent, has to abide by a very specific set of rules. There are rules out there that are set up by God, and they have to follow those. So it's I don't know if you're familiar with Vicki Joy Anderson and her book They Only Come Out at Night.
I think I've heard that name before, but
Yeah,
I gotta
you
write it
should
down.
definitely talk to her. I'll put you in touch with
Oh,
her.
thank you.
There are permissions and rules, and so someone at some point had to give permission for them to take me, and it could have been as far back. I know you spoke to a woman who was in the Mormon church, and she had bloodlines going back, and she had to break all those generational curses. Those generational curses can provide that permission,
Right.
for generations.
Well, and
And so that's one reason it goes in bloodlines. And another reason can be the blood type, the genetics. They
yeah.
want very specific genetics. And like you said, the abilities. So there are a lot of things they look for. And if you got all those, which I probably did, that's a bonus because then they're getting all kinds of things that they want.
Right. Right. And you just brought a really, well, I think it's a great question. You tell me. But past guest on the show, Joshua Cutchin, he writes about this concept or this idea that the alien abductions of the past 100 or 200 years are very similar to the fairy or fae folk encounters of the, folklore of Europe. And people generally, they take the UFO concept and they're like, oh, that's sci-fi, that's new, it's only happened for the past 60 years, which, can you speak to that? Because I think that's just utterly nonsense that this would just all of a sudden start happening 100 years ago, right? Like, this is
Right.
these beings are very old, right?
Oh, very. This is not new. You can go back to ancient stone carvings that we can't even carbon date or date a time for, ancient scrolls, ancient texts, ancient books, the Christian Bible. All of these books talk about chariots of fire, pillars of fire, entities that can walk through walls and break chains, that can change form and then sit down and eat with you and then go back into the other form and go back into another plane, such as an astral plane or whatever have you. These entities have existed long, long, long before us. If from a Christian perspective, the Bible talks about the B'nai Ha-Elohim, which are the sons of God. And these are the entities that were created before God created men. And it says when he recreated the earth, because the earth was in devastation from a previous incursion and incident, that they all shouted for joy because they were so happy to see the earth brought back to form. And that's when God put men on the earth, which also caused some issues because there was then some jealousy. Well, we loved the earth. Now you're giving it to these men you made out of dirt. We were beautiful. These angels were adorned. They said Satan was the most beautiful of all. He was adorned with precious jewels, and he fell because he wanted to take God's throne, and he took a third of the angels with him. We'll call them angels. That's really kind of a misnomer, but they're angelic beings. They're sons of God, just like we are. We're sons and daughters of God too, because because of Jesus, we have been given that bridge back into the family. So these entities you can find in almost every religious belief, every mythology, every historical reference, as far back as you can find information.
Right.
You know, they were here long before us, and they'll be here after us as well.
So it's very possible that, our your great grandfather or my great grandfather, any one of us could have, have an ancestor who interacted with these beings, and that may have been a cause that, still affects us to this day. I mean, wow.
Absolutely. And I had a lot of Masonic background in my family as well.
Okay.
My grandfather was a very high level Mason. My parents were both in D Malay and Eastern Star. I was inducted into Rainbow Girls when I was about 13 or 14 years old. 14, maybe 14 or 15. Once I got actually through the full induction, I realized this is not, it gave me a sick feeling because you've got a bunch of little girls, probably 15, 14 years old, walking around a room that's ringed with all these old men, watching them walk, around, and it it was gross. Anyway, so yeah, there's a lot of different things in my history that could have added those permissions. Definitely, most definitely.
Wow.
But as far as the entities go, yeah, they are, we can talk about that more later if you want, but yes.
Yeah, well, and it's fascinating to hear the background, right? Because I think, again, people have a sort of sci-fi misnomer about this stuff, that it's all new and just appeared out of nowhere with this progress in technology. But it seems it's very old. And I heard you describe, while you were being interviewed by L.A. Marzulli, who is helping publish the book and wrote the foreword to the book. He was asking you about the abduction experience. Let's talk about that. But you described a feeling almost like each part of your entire body turned to like a ball bearing, and one by one you were like transmuted through your window, right? You weren't actually, the window wasn't open, the doors weren't open, there wasn't a hole that opened in the roof. You actually transmuted through the material itself. Wow, talk
Right.
about that.
It's a very common thing, and I've talked to so many abductees now. I've had the privilege of being able to speak with and correspond with a lot of abductees, men and women, um, different countries, different places, different races, ethnicities. This thing has no boundaries as far as who, where, and when some of these things can happen. And we've all had the same experience. You do get a feeling when they're, before they show up or when they're about to show up. You just can feel a change in the atmosphere, a change in the room. If you're sensitive, you'll feel that kind of evil coming in. But and a lot of times during an abduction or when it's first starting, some people will see the entities in the room. I often saw the typical grays with the big bulbous heads and the giant black kind of screen-like eyes, the short, about 3 to 4 feet tall, and they would generally be at the foot of the bed or beside the bed, somewhere in the room, sometimes outside the window. I'm not sure why, but and they would levitate me off the bed. At that point, sometimes you'd be put into a sleep state and call it being turned off, but not always. And almost always, that was a point where sleep paralysis, a type of sleep paralysis, would set in, where you're awake and aware, and you've already been awake and aware, but before you can speak or do anything, it's like you're that paralysis. And I think that's why the paralysis event that I had in the hospital was just so emotional for me, and I had to get the therapy because having been through so much of that similar kind of thing, only I could breathe in those events, it just brought back a lot of terror for me. But at that point, they would levitate me off the bed. And it's funny because I'll talk to people about how close I got to the ceiling and to see the seams and the little curls in the wallpaper or all the little bugs in the dirt and the light fixtures and stuff. It's just these weird things that you would never see as a little child from the vantage point on the bed or the floor, and just crazy things like that, seeing going up through the attic. And I always wanted to go in the attic, and my grandmother would never let me, but I knew that all this cool stuff was up there. And she's like, well, how do you know that stuff's up there? I'm like, well, I just want to go see. And I didn't know how to tell her, why, because I go through it. Yeah. I mean, because it was right over that bedroom. So it's, yeah, you can't.
Wow.
And then I don't want to get in trouble and her think that I snuck up there. So I couldn't tell her that. So anyway, but when I would get to that point, it's the room, just everything. Sometimes there's a really low hum, and it's like a low hum that goes from low to lower. I don't know if anyone remembers like the THX thing that would come on before movies and do that really low and that gets lower sound. Oh God, I could never listen to that. It's really similar to that. Um, and then it would just feel like my body was just from the inside out, just starting to almost vibrate and just separate into like, but still together, but in just millions and millions of pieces. And I was just, you feel yourself go through, but you didn't feel the wall. I didn't feel the window. It just going through it effortlessly. And it,
Right.
and it makes no sense. I mean, our minds don't conceive that, but it's different. It's what Dr. David Jacobs calls future physics, because it's a physics that we can't explain or understand yet. And someday we probably will. I mean, you look at the differences of things that have happened in the last 20 years, So, and these entities, you have to remember, they're so much older, so much smarter. They are not designed for our world, so we can't keep them in our little box of understanding, right?
Right. Right.
They understand things on a much higher plane. They have intelligence we can't understand, and they do things that we just don't understand.
Yeah, and they conceivably have had this technology for millions of years, right? So, I
Right.
mean, what seems effortless to them would take a whole nation's effort in our human terms, right? And yeah,
Exactly.
it's really astounding the description you're giving. I mean, it sounds a lot like, and this is an intangible, so I appreciate the fact that you're clarifying, saying it's hard to imagine. I'm sitting here thinking it sounds a lot like what these quantum scientists struggle to explain with
Hmm.
particles and, how things aren't really material. They're not really physical. It's all just energy. Maybe it's just a matter of loosening those energetic
Yeah.
bonds just enough so that everything kind of meshes through itself. And I mean, not to
Yeah.
get hung up on the details, but where did you when you phase through your home, where did you
Hmm.
go? Into a ship, into another place, into another realm?
A lot of times it would be just into a light being. Sometimes once in a while, I'd be able to see around me things, but usually into a light and then into either a ship, or at that point, I'd be kind of turned off, knocked out, and I would wake up along the way or getting somewhere or going somewhere. It was different all the time. Not every time. There were similar places. Some places I went very, very often. Um, Especially when I was little, I was often taken to an underground facility. And I know it's underground because we went in an elevator. And I would talk about the elevators that went down and down and down and down. And I hated it because I knew we were going so far down that there was no doorway, no way to get out. And I just felt trapped. And then I talked about the elevators that went side to side and went diagonal. And then I realized, those side to side elevators were probably some sort of a train or a transport. But I was just a little kid. So, you're getting off one and going into another, and doors open the same way as an elevator door would. And I was in a seat, and then I was going, forward or backwards, depending. So often underground. But yeah, I think you're right. The physics of it is just something we we can't understand, and so it's really hard to explain.
Yeah. Well, and you say going into a ship and then arriving in these underground bases. This is
Mhm.
really, I think, a key detail because a lot of abduction experiences, people have this same experience that you talk about where they're turned off and then they're awake all of a sudden somewhere else, right? And
Right.
you were able to experience some of the transit because you were
Oh,
awake for a lot of it, and that's really incredible that you were able to observe that because it seems like they don't want us observing; they just want to maybe for us to be conscious during the experiment
I
side
don't
of
even
it.
think they want that, quite honestly. They have a hard time, I think, sometimes keeping us subdued or keeping us unconscious. The human spirit is very strong,
Right.
and for some people, we just refuse. I mean, I was just one of those little kids that refused to give up. I mean, I wrote about it in my book. I punched an elephant when I was like 5 or 6 years old because it stole my cotton candy. I was not one of those kids who was afraid of things or who was just going to give up and let someone overpower me. And I was getting tired of it. And I think that's why I kept waking up. And then I think at some point they're like, forget it. She's fine. She knows what she's doing. She knows where she's going. She's not going to scream or yell or cry anymore. Because there's a certain point where you also kind of you give in to what's happening.
Yeah.
As far as the screaming, yelling, crying, you realize as a little child that's not going to help anymore. And I think they just kind of stopped trying to put me to sleep all the time. I think they did for the more scary things, like more scary procedures and things like that.
Now,
But for the most part, they just let it go.
now these beings, you're obviously a child. Did they seem to have any empathy or any sort of emotion at all, like you would expect an adult to have towards a child? Like, were they at all human like, or just completely alien, completely
Yeah.
cold?
No, especially those Nordic looking entities. I think that's why I was so afraid of my father's side of the family because they looked human enough that I think as I was hoping that they would have some empathy towards me, but they were just mean. They just had nothing. I mean, there was a complete lack of kindness, of empathy, of understanding. There you can tell that I could tell that some of the entities I encountered had learned just how to deal with people. So they were using a sort of psychology as far as going, it's okay, everything's going to be fine. But when you say that or you speak that, a lot of mind speak going on, with these entities without any uh
Like
I can't think of the word.
genuineness or
Yeah,
authenticity?
yeah, with any authenticity, without any inflection to your voice.
Hmm.
You're saying it's fine, it's going to be fine, it's going to be fine,
Right,
just
just
flat
very
like that.
dry.
I
Yeah,
mean, it doesn't do any good, but they're,
yeah.
I could tell they were trying to deal with us as far as who we were and how we acted and reacted, but they didn't care how I felt, what I was going through. I was a means to an end. And
Well,
for
and
my whole life, I was a means to an end for them.
I ask this because there does seem to be different camps as far as the whole
Absolutely.
alien situation
Hmm.
goes, and some authors have this whole perspective that, oh, it's love and light, and even though I was being abducted, this was all for the betterment of my karma, and these beings care about me on a deep level, and this was all for my experience. And I wonder, based on your experience, it really doesn't seem like any of that is going on. It doesn't seem like these beings have your best interest in mind, or that they're somehow karmically teaching you anything. They're just using you like a farmer would use a cattle in a factory farm, right? I mean that.
Right. I mean, they did teach me things. They taught me when I was really little that everything is made of energy, and they taught me about magnets, and they taught me about math. And I was one of these kids that never had to open a book and just was able to skate through school. And, they tried to indoctrinate me into a program of believing that they were our benevolent space brothers and
Mm.
believing that they were here for our greater good. And I understand how people can believe that. And I'm not judging anyone who believes that, trust me. But what I will say is, I have a savior who suffered for my sins. I don't have to suffer to elevate myself, and I don't want to elevate myself. I want to fall on my knees and worship my God and my creator. I'm not a co creator, I have a creator who I am wonderfully and beautifully made, just like you, and we are all individual. And that is the beauty of my creator, that he doesn't want me to suffer for my sins. That suffering already happened. That price got paid for me. So, when these things happen, I was I was buying into it for a while, and I was kind of in the program and believing that they were love and light, but it's like an abuser giving you a gift. they're beating the crap out of you one minute, and then the next day they come home with a pretty piece of jewelry so that you don't tell the neighbors that you're getting beaten up or whatever. It's, it's that kind of just giving you enough to keep stringing you along. And an abusive relationship, psychologically is really hard to get out of, because you really feel like, well, this is where I'm supposed to be. And well, that only happened to me because I deserved it, because I was bad. And that's not true. That's never true. You should never victim shame anyone. And kidnapping a little child, since when is there anything benevolent about that?
Right.
Terrifying a little baby, a little kid, or think about even the cows in the field. I mean, just
Yeah.
they're helpless. It's like kicking a kitten across the road. That's not okay. There's just never an opportunity, never a time when there's just no excuse.
It's cruel. It really is
It's
cruel, and
cruelty.
and
Yeah.
it, when we get into the darker details of all this, and really what your the title of your book implies, "Stolen Seed, Evil Harvest," is that these beings are, and I know this sounds really, dark, but they're farming us, right? Like the
Mhm.
analogy of, being in a factory farm. I mean, it's really dark, and I hate to, say, oh, you're just, you were put through a factory farm, because you're a human being. No human being should be put through that. But
Yeah.
I mean, how else are we to reconcile this? Charles
Right.
Fort, his many years of looking into this back at in the 1800s, I think he died in 1930, Charles Fort, and he came to this
Mhm.
conclusion after looking at all these strange anomalous reports that there must be some sort of invisible force above us that's for
Yeah.
like farming us, right? So,
Oh, yeah.
uh, you know, Stolen Seed, Evil Harvest, this is the title of your book. Let's get into the details on why you would name it that. And is it as I'm kind of describing, is it really that dark?
It really is that dark.
Wow.
Yeah. It's very dark. I try to pepper the book with some of the really positive experiences that I've had. I've had experiences with really beautiful, benevolent, angelic entities. They are out there as well. And I don't want people to remember that. And there are a few places in the book where I warn the reader that if this is uncomfortable, then you might want to skip this part. Because the uncomfortable truth is this has been happening, back to, if you go back to Genesis 6, in the first incursion of the fallen watcher angels, when they saw the daughters of men were beautiful, and they chose of them wives of all who they pleased, and they had children with them, and these were the Nephilim, the giants, the mighty men of old. That's where it started. And unfortunately, it's never stopped. I mean, those first 200 were chained in Tartarus. They had to watch their Nephilim children die in the flood. These children then became what we know today as demons, the demonic spirits that roam the earth, because they were neither from heaven nor from the human world, from earth. So, and they were an abomination in God's sight. They weren't one of God's creations. So they were damned to roam the earth until the final judgment, which is why in the Bible, when Jesus comes up to some of the possessed people, the demonic entities will say, "You've come to judge us before our time." They know it's not their time yet, and they know when their time is. We don't know that, but they know that. And so they're obviously kind of at a level above us, because they have that sons of God genetics and they have human genetics. But so these entities, these demonic entities, these demons are what roam the earth now. But I'm digressing. Sorry. But this has been happening for a very long time since then. And the Bible tells us that we'll know when we're in the end times and the days are getting close, because it will be like it was in the days of Noah. And what was happening in the days of Noah? Well, the genetic experiments, the mixing of species. They were mixing different animals, humans with fallen watchers. Not just that, though. Humans and animals, different animals with each other. What are we doing today? I mean, you can Google, just type in mixing animals, and there's dozens of articles and reports and things. And we're cloning things, and we're doing all kinds of crazy stuff. We have artificial blooms. So, but what happened to me is not an isolated incident. It's something that's I've spoken to many women who've had a similar experience. In L.A. Marzulli's UFO movie series, which is the UFO Disclosure series. Sorry, I was looking to make sure I said the name right. But in the fourth movie in that series, he talks to me and three other people and another woman who had a really similar experience to mine, Angela. And I was impregnated by these entities. I was raped. My eggs were taken. They did different things. I wasn't raped to impregnate me. That was just part of the dark part of what they do. But they did take my eggs, they did fertilize them, put them back in. I was pregnant the first time I was in maybe 22, and I was married, so it wasn't that I didn't think I could get pregnant. So it wasn't, I just didn't expect it. We weren't trying to, so it was, a surprise. And in about the third month, I didn't feel good. I was spotting, but I didn't lose the baby. I didn't see any physical miscarriage, but I was cramping so bad and spotting so bad that middle of the night, 3 in the morning, whatever, my then husband took me to the hospital, and they did an ultrasound, and there was no baby. There was no heartbeat. And they did a DNC, and there was no fetal tissue, none. If I had had a miscarriage, there would at least be some fetal tissue still in there or something. But my uterus was clean. I had been to the doctor. This is a verified, confirmed pregnancy. It was almost it was almost the end of the third month. And this happened over and over again to me. It was terrifying, and I didn't get to mourn those babies. I didn't know if they were boys or girls. All I knew is my babies were gone. And I thought they were dead. It was terrible. But then a couple of years ago, it wasn't very long ago, it was just a few years ago, I was praying about it, and I really thought that if these babies were half mine, then they could be half good. And maybe if I could get them, I could take care of them, and they would just be okay, right? They could be normal like people. And I learned that's not the case. I had an experience with them, an encounter where three of them showed up in my home, and it was terrifying. They weren't. There was just no love. All I felt was just evil emanating off of them. It was the coldest. It was so weird, because as soon as I saw them, I knew they were mine, and I just wanted to jump up and hug them. I just wanted to get them, and they didn't want that. They wanted me to come with them, but they had no love for me, no care, no compassion. They were as cold as any other entity I'd ever encountered on one of those ships or underground or wherever I'd encountered them. So they tried to levitate me off the bed, not so they tried to pull me away because I was on the bed at the time. And I was like, why are you doing this? I just wanted to love them, and it was just so evil. And then I called out to Jesus. I was like, Jesus, help me. What's going on? Why? And as soon as I did that, as soon as I said Jesus' name, they just took off. They were gone in an instant. And that was the end of it. And I think God allowed that to happen so that I would have my closure.
Right.
Because my heart just yearned for them. I mean, as a mother, my heart yearned for them. I have children that I love very much. And I adopt any kid who comes by, anyone who wants to be my kid. I'll be like, come on in. That's how I am. And maybe that's why, I don't know. But I did need that closure, and I finally got that closure. So, and I realized they're no different. They're just a modern day Nephilim, just like the ones that we read about in the Bible and the extra canonical books like Jasher and Enoch and those books, which some people are familiar with. They look different, but they're no different than than those Nephilim of olden times.
Yeah. Well, God bless you for your bravery and, the ability to speak this to the world, because I can't imagine the women out there who aren't able to speak this and have endured these tragic and terrible circumstances, and are feeling like they have no voice. And I hope your book can reach them and they can maybe find that closure themselves in a way that doesn't isn't so confronting, because that is really hard to hear. And Karen, again, I commend you for your bravery. I mean, God bless you. This is.
Well, it's all God. I don't know how I'm doing this except that I was directed to do it. And, I would wake up every day and God would just say, write. And I'm like, what do I write? God's like, write your truth, write your truth. And
Right.
that's what I wrote. But I want it to be okay. I want it to be okay for people to talk about this. I want it to be okay for someone to go to their friend or their pastor or their neighbor or whoever and say, hey, this happened to me and I'm having a real hard time with it. I just need to talk about it and deal with it. Or to go to a therapist or whoever. But you can't go and say, hey, I've been taken my whole life and I've had babies ripped from my womb and I've had all this stuff go on and I need to learn how to deal with it. Nobody wants to hear that.
Well, and
But,
to get a little conspiratorial, I wonder how much that's due to these forces infiltrating the authorities in government and religion. I mean,
oh, absolutely.
I was raised in the Catholic Church, and whatever it was inside of me that was looking for a true spirituality, it showed me a way away from the Catholic Church. And when I was young, that that appeared as atheism, and slowly I grew out of that and realized there is a creator and there is a God. But and not to pick on Catholics if there's any Catholics listening, but I feel like there's a strong possibility that the reason why these sorts of experiences aren't generally given respect or even sort of rational, the rational response that is really required, is because there's some sort of manipulation going on behind the scenes where they're stopping these priests or whoever who are supposed to be kind of in charge of helping us through these experiences. They've been, bought out or manipulated long ago. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, not the just like the Catholic Church. I have a lot of wonderful friends who are Catholic and I love them dearly and they love God dearly. But I think all religious beliefs, all churches right now, most all, and I'm not going to say all because there are some out there that don't, but for the most part, churches don't teach the truth in the whole Bible. They'll teach the pieces that they're comfortable with and they kind of leave the rest. They get to something like Genesis 6 or Genesis 3:15 and they're like, they'll read it real quick or they won't read it all and we're just going to skip over that because most people don't understand it or whatever. So they're obfuscating these parts of the Bible, or they don't want to teach the more esoteric, the strange parts of the Bible, the parts that sound scary or different or strange or paranormal in that type of thing. They don't want to. The church doesn't want to teach the Bible. They want to teach the easy parts. They want to teach the Sunday school version well into adulthood, and that's not okay. It's hard to find a church that will teach the whole Bible. It's hard to find people who want to talk about what's really going on in the world. I mean, there are whistleblowers in the government sitting there saying, yeah, we have ships. Yeah, we have biologics. Has that changed anybody's opinion about UFOs? No, not really. All it's done is take the few of us who know that they're real and people like you and me and said, well, see, I told you, but nobody wants to hear our I told you so's either because they don't want to hear there's too much cognitive dissonance going on. They don't want to hear what's going on with the government, or they're just going to keep kind of listening into it until it just becomes another one of those things. And they've kind of dulled everyone to the point that it's no longer interesting or something to think about or worry about. It's just there. But yeah, that's kind of a long answer. Sorry.
No.
But I do think the churches don't teach real spirituality. They don't teach the realness and the wholeness of the Bible.
Yeah.
And people get bored and they make it sound like you have to walk this very specific path and this specific line and do it the way this person says. Jesus says, just come to me.
Right.
Accept me.
Right.
repent of your sins. He's got the rest. We don't have to suffer. He already paid that price. It's easy stuff. It's easy stuff. And then we don't have to suffer from things like these entities. But you're right. If it is the dark entities that are behind our governments and our churches and everybody else, why would they want people to know that it's so easy to stop these attacks?
Yeah.
Then they lose control. If we were all understanding the authority that is out there for us through Jesus, through God, through our Creator, they'd lose all control. They definitely don't want that. They being the powers that be, that are in control, that are run by the dark forces.
Right. Well, and I think it's something as simple as, the economy, right? Because you can take that as a overarching kind of trickle effect that affects all things. I mean, money has its influence in all these places, and even in the church, you have this imperative that goes beyond our Lord and following the Bible, because they're worried about keeping lights on in the church. And I mean, that's just a sort of root of the example, and there's a whole discussion
Money is the
there.
root of
But
all evil, right?
well, and that's the thing. It's like, I wonder if it's not even that these dark forces have to necessarily trick every priest and be cajoling every single structure of human society. It's just that one switch that they need to get into the minds of one person, and it creates this domino effect where, okay, now we're all banking, and oh, now it's all debt, and obviously, you're not here to talk about our crumbling financial system,
Well,
but
it affects all of us, though, doesn't it?
but
I'll
I
talk about that too. I don't mind. I mean, because that's something that affects everyone, doesn't it? And
right.
it's out of our control because they control the prices and the incomes and everything else. I mean, it's there's just no way to make it anymore unless you're, I'm not saying anyone who has money is dabbling in something dark, but they certainly are making it more
Difficult to become
yeah, more
wealthy. Yeah.
difficult to do it without getting involved in something nefarious.
Well, and I think
Making
that's,
nefarious more palatable.
yeah, I think that's a big part of this, where they corrupt people, and whether willingly or knowingly, you participate in this sinful thing, and then now you're part of this corrupt paradigm that allows for these things to happen on a mass scale. But let's get back to the whole process. I mean, obviously this is a tough subject, but I gotta ask, because I'm sure people at home are curious. Is these Nephilim that are obviously using human beings to create hybrids, create, the breeding essentially? Is it because they cannot themselves incarnate here physically without sort of getting whatever's going on with humans? They need to inherently interact with us in order to interact on the earth. Like, talk about why, like, why are they doing this? What's the imperative for them?
Yeah, there's definitely something holding them back. I think that there's a permission that they don't have because when God sends angels, they can just walk among us. They can be with us. I've had angelic encounters that are amazing and they've been sent by God. But I think they have to have that permission to be allowed to be here, existing in this plane, in our environment, under our sun, that kind of thing. Um, what we see is these little gray aliens that come to get people, that are the ones that would come and be in my room, or that everyone seems to see, right? The common 3 to 4 foot bulbous head, black-eyed gray alien. I really believe, and many of my friends are in agreement with me, that these are an avatar type meat suit, basically, that is made to inhabit demons. Demonic entities, like I said, are the spirits of the deceased Nephilim. And we know that these demons want to inhabit a body, right? That's huge. They're always looking for someone or something to inhabit, whether it's a person or an animal, what have you. So this gives them a body to inhabit. It gives their elders, these fallen angelic beings, is what I believe the alien, the ETs are, a body that can come here into our space where humans are on Earth come and pick us up, do their dirty work. And think about it, if these grays are in the ships and the ship crashes and we're going in there to grab whatever died in the ship, it's just an empty suit at that point. There's nothing in it and we're not going to get anything. I've seen these things up close. They smell bad. They're like a cross, I've said, between a dead animal and sulfur. They have it, their eyes don't seem to move. They seem very stationary, like it's just like almost like a plastic screen in front. Their arms and legs are so thin, looks like you could just snap them in two. Their bodies just don't look like there's anything in there. You don't see any movement, no beating heart, no breathing. Their mouths don't open, their noses don't move. They don't really have ears or anything. They're literally they have just enough movement and ability to get the job done and not get themselves in trouble, because it was a demon and they had sexual organs, they'd probably be raping people or screaming obscenities at people if they had a mouth or things like that. So whoever designed these, that was pretty smart, thinking we got to restrict the demons a little bit.
Well, and it sounds like a husk, like what people describe, like these, from like ancient and medieval times, descriptions of demons, like this sulfur smelling and like, wow. So,
and some smell worse than others. I don't know if it has to do with the age of that suit or how it's been stored or where it goes, or, you know what I mean?
But that explains
why some smell worse than others. Some of them are just...
That explains why these bodies that are allegedly recovered from UFO crashes are basically non-existent after a matter of time, because there's nothing really organic about them. It's like a just kind of like a physical husk with a
right.
entity
There's no
inside
organs
of it
or anything in there. It's just, like we can create skin in a lab. It's just like that, right?
Wow.
So, and then there are other grays that aren't like that. There are grays that I've encountered who are taller than those. Their eyes actually do move, like shift back and forth. They are more sturdy build. They have like wrinkles on their faces. Their mouths actually open and close. These, I think, are what those suits are modeled after, but these are actually a race of beings that I have encountered on the ships or underground. I've never seen one come into my room or outside my window. Obviously, I don't think they can survive here. I really don't think they can survive in our atmosphere. I think they could probably use the gray suits for themselves if they made them the right size. You know what I mean?
Right. But they need that sort of middleman, because we're inherently in a atmosphere or a gravity situation, whatever it is about our Earth, that maybe it's not even physics. Maybe it's something spiritual. Maybe it's something...
I think it's both. I think you're right. I think it's a little bit of both. I think after the flood of Noah, God changed some things up.
Right.
I think he changed because I don't think there was rain before then. I don't think there were crops before then. I think that's why Noah got drunk on the wine, because he started a vineyard. I don't think he'd ever had that kind of wine before, right? I think that he changed through permissions. We don't have all of that information, because it doesn't affect our salvation, so we don't need it. But if you read some of the extra canonical books like Enoch and Jasher and those books, you can find out a lot more about that. And I do write a little bit about Noah in the book because of that, because I think it's important. It shows a turning point where these sons of God that fell, we don't see them walking among us anymore like they did back in those days, in the days of Noah. Or Sodom and Gomorrah, where the angels walk into the city with him, and boy, they wanted them, right? They must have been beautiful.
Yeah.
And I believe angels can come and be around us with permission. I've had an angelic encounter that was amazing, where they helped me and saved me. But I do think there is a lot to that. Yeah.
Well, I do want to ask about your angelic encounter. I have it written down here.
Okay.
But before we get into that, it's fascinating, these details that you're sharing about, the limitations of these beings, and it explains a lot as to why they would need to come here and bring us to a certain place before these experiments take place, rather than just doing it in the ship. There's really, it's really fascinating because unrelated to this conversation, I was just speaking with a gentleman about his research into like inventors who experience kind of weird insights and then go and invent really strange things. And you might have listened to this conversation. I don't know,
Haven't yet. No.
but you're familiar with the topic maybe based
A
on
little bit.
your reaction.
Yeah.
So Viktor Grabinikov, he invented this really weird device. He's a Siberian scientist, so where it's behind the Iron Curtain. We don't have a lot of information about his whole life, but Grabinikov, he invented this craft that could fly allegedly. We won't get into all the details. People can listen to that episode to hear more about it. But one of the things that he described while flying this craft was that it had a negative effect on him internally. Like he realized that if he flew around in this thing for too long, it would not only make him like hallucinate, but it would make him physically ill and sick. So maybe that explains why they have these gray robots, these biological robots in there, because the flying saucers are just like, they go so fast and defy what is, what we can endure as a organic life form. And maybe these taller grays, they conform to some of the same limitations that we do as humans. So they need to create these little, replaceable beings. I mean, just a little bit of, speculation here, but I thought that kind of fit into what you described.
That really does fit well. No, that's a really good point. And I think that you're definitely onto something with that too, because yeah, I think that there are so many limitations and things going on here that we just don't know. We don't understand. I mean, they manipulate space, time, energy, and matter, as L.A. Marzulli likes to say, in ways that we can't understand. And we have a lot to learn, and I think we're getting a lot of our technology and our information from them to begin with.
Right.
And they're feeding it to us as they want us to have it.
Right.
So if we get too far ahead, then they'll lose their advantage as well. So there's a certain importance to keeping us dumbed down as much as possible.
Well, and there's a famous quote that people often pull out when they start talking about this subject. That's I think Arthur C. Clarke or someone like that, who said, sufficient or sophisticated enough technology is indistinguishable from magic to a primitive culture, right? And I wonder if the inverse of that idiom is true, where these beings are creating technology that is inherently based around sorcery. It's not that they've created something so technological that it appears that way to us, it appears magical. What if it actually is sorcery? What if it is magic and it goes into a different paradigm?
Exactly. And what if sorcery is actually for them more like physics is for us?
That's exactly.
And I do have that quote in my book, the Arthur C. Clarke book, is in the first chapter of my book. So
I love that.
It's so funny that you brought that up. I'm like, I have to show you that.
Wow, look at that. And I think that look at that little mind melding right there.
We're on the same track.
Yeah, for full disclosure, folks, I haven't received a copy of the book yet, so I'm excited to read it. And obviously, I'd love to have you back on in the future, but once I read it. But anyways, wow, yeah. So on that point, I mean, it does kind of put this biblical perspective on things, because that's a big part of what the Bible warns us against, is participating in this kind of stuff.
Why does the Bible warn us against that? Because we can't handle it. We're not sufficiently equipped. We don't have the discernment to tell the good from the evil and the right from the wrong. And we aren't necessarily equipped to handle what it would do. It's like giving a toddler a lit torch gun, and saying, here, go play with this, or this fire thrower or flamethrower. You don't do that. Okay. For the same reason, we are careful with our children and what we allow them to have and do. I really think it's similar to us. These are things we don't have the capability to manage or deal with properly, and in the wrong hands can cause a lot of danger and a lot of trouble. So, where we think, oh, Dad, you're not letting me do that. It sounds like it's really fun. Well, there's a reason. We may not understand it now, but I'm sure someday we will. And we'll be like, oh, Phew, thank you for keeping that away from us. We could have done some real damage with that,
Mm, mm.
So you've got to really, I try to look at both sides of everything and really think through. I wonder why this is happening. I wonder why we're not supposed to do that. And that's really all I can come up with on that front. But I do think, yeah, what we consider magic, they probably consider just everyday arts and physics and everything else.
Well, and people who are latched on to science will say like, oh, well, that's foolish, we don't know how far we can go until we go there. But if you look around the planet, we have all these examples of ancient cultures who did things that we can't do today, right? The
Right.
pyramids and so on, moving huge blocks of stone. What if that's exactly what the Bible was created to do? To say, hey folks, like, you screwed up, I let you just take over the shop. I came back as your Lord and Creator, and I realized that I didn't give you enough rules because you went and screwed everything up. So here are your rules. Here's a flood. Here's a reset. And maybe that's why
Right.
we have all these stone structures around the planet that kind of point to this ancient,
Yeah, I think you're
advanced.
right on the nose with a lot of that. I really do. And I think these angelic beings that were here before us kind of did the same thing. I
Mm,
think they really screwed up too, and that's why Satan and the third of them fell, because they're like, well, look at all this. Well, I can run this show too, and that's when he rebelled, and he still thinks he can run the show. He still thinks he's better than his creator, which I don't understand. But people who say the Bible's a bunch of hooey, ask any Satanist, they know the Bible better than most Christians ever will. And
mm,
there's a reason for that,
mm.
because it's not hooey. They need to know it, because that's how they're getting their energy and their strength too, because they have to understand both sides of it very well. Um, there's a lot of dangerous spaces out there, and we have to be careful where we're playing and just make sure we're being protected. And these entities, these alien entities, are can be very dangerous if you don't know how to protect yourself and how to keep them away from you. And I do not ever recommend that anyone go out there looking for them or calling on them, because that you might as well be summoning a demon.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's something that you hear more often than not just with alien abductions, with all sorts of occult interactions where people try and go use things like Ouija boards. And I know that sounds cliche, but there's even, things like synchronicity that can get people in a string of bad luck and where they intended to have good luck. And you have to wonder, like, maybe that's because they're dabbling in opening up these doorways, and you just open it up just a little bit and it leaves enough room for something to slip through.
Right. I mean, we got to remember everything has a price.
Mm,
Everything like that has a price. And Jesus paid the price for salvation. So salvation doesn't have had a price, and Jesus paid that. God paid that when he came down as a man and paid the price for the fact that we're fallen and sinful. But so we don't have to worry about that. But everything else, it's the balance is there. If you take one from here, you have to put one over there.
mm,
It's that's how it works. The scales are always having to be balanced. So if you're getting something for free, you're going to pay somewhere down the road.
yeah.
Guarantee it.
Yeah. Well, and that, brings me back to, and I apologize. I've been researching this whole Atlantis topic, and it's a
Oh, I love that
huge,
topic. Yeah.
huge topic. But one of the things that has come through channelers like Edgar Casey, which not quite a channeler the same way Abraham Hicks is, but
Mhm.
Edgar Casey is very well known for
Oh
his
yeah.
ability to heal and give people accurate readings. But
Yeah.
one of
That's
the
a crazy story.
well, and one of the things that came through with him is that the people in this ancient time, this lost civilization, they had a device that was too powerful. It was so powerful that it ended up, causing a lot of good, but then created equal and opposite bad for all the good it created, right? And I think that's part of this whole message is like, you can't get something for nothing. And they tried to create this free energy thing that ended up backfiring and destroying their
Oh
whole
wow.
civilization. I mean, that's just what Edgar Casey kind of deduced through his past life readings. But Who's to say that's not accurate given all the things that scientists are finding now with, a big cataclysm that occurred. They call it the Younger Dryas period.
Yeah.
But,
And it's cyclical, right? Every 12,000 years we get these pole shifts and these changes and these ice ages happen,
right.
and we're about due for one. So,
Well,
global warming, I don't think so. I think what we need to worry about is the pole shift that's probably coming.
and where better to survive all that stuff than in an underground bunker where these beings are,
Yeah.
allegedly that's where they are, right? I mean,
Right.
there could
And
be.
who else supposedly has underground bunkers?
Right.
A lot of very wealthy people, right? Yeah, they're going to be just fine. Us, well,
Well,
we're disposable still. I mean, I've been treated that way by these entities my whole life. Why would it change now? Right. But
yeah.
God doesn't treat me like I'm disposable. God
Right.
treats me like I'm the most precious thing ever, and that's the difference. That's the difference between benevolence and malevolence.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
that's how I know the difference.
Wow. Well, and let's get into the difference because
Okay.
we talked about these negative
Mhm.
experiences a bunch, and I'm sure people are frightened.
I don't want anyone to be frightened, so please
Well,
don't be frightened.
no,
But
and I say that in jest because it is. I try to have fun on this
it is
show, but
scary.
it's a serious topic. So maybe to lighten things up a little bit, let's talk about your angelic encounters and show
Well,
people that
absolutely.
there is an equal good side to this, right?
There is. There is. God is out there and he is good. And when you call on him, he does hear you. I it was after that near life experience I described earlier. Um, they went ahead with the surgery, which they really shouldn't have done. Um, and I was waking up in the recovery room. And every time I'd wake up, I was just screaming in agony. I don't think my spirit wanted to come back in my body, and my blood pressure would just go off the charts, and I think they were afraid I was going to have a heart attack or a stroke, so they kept putting me back under. And every time they bring me out, the pain was just overwhelming, excruciating. And after about 3.5 hours of this, in and out of anesthesia, trying to get me back, into recovery, I remember praying to God, going, God, please help me. I don't know what to do, because I realized this cycle was going to end in a very bad way if something didn't change. Um, and the next time I opened my eyes, there were these two young male orderlies standing at the foot of the bed, and they were comforting me and they calmed me down. They told me everything was going to be okay. They just, you know, they they just made everything okay. They calmed me down. They were sweet. I just remember looking at them going, you look like you could be two of my kids. Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you so much for helping me. I don't know how I would have gotten through this without you guys. All of a sudden, even though I was in pain, I was suddenly able to come out of anesthesia, calm down, be calm enough to get, on the oxygen, get back to just breathing on my own and being okay. And I had a million bazillion uh things stuck on me and wires and stuff because I had stopped breathing and because I'd had a stroke. They were, very concerned about everything. But these guys were just so sweet and so loving and so lovely. And they just stayed with me until I was, calm enough. And then we went to leave the recovery room and shortly after they showed up to go up to the room, and remember my husband and my daughter were standing there, and I grabbed their hands. I'm like, you have to meet these boys. Oh, they're so amazing. I said, honey, they look like they could be two of our kids. They're just the sweetest kids. And I looked at the nurse and I said, where are the boys, the orderlies that were with us? And she's like, honey, I don't know who you're talking about. And I said, they were with me in recovery and all the way up in the elevator and down the hall. Where did they go? And nobody had any idea I was talking about. They're like, there were never any other orderlies, just us, and I kept asking everybody, and no one knew who I was talking about. No, they were never there, and never saw them again, never saw them anywhere in the hospital. I looked, trust me, I looked. Um, and I concluded at the end, they also never spoke to me physically. And then I'm thinking about they didn't have any badges on, they were just wearing scrubs, and they were, I believe that this was an angelic encounter. because no one else saw them. No one could find them for me afterwards. No one knew who I was talking about. Um, and so, when I called out to God for help, he sent these entities to be with me. These are also sons of God, B'nai Elohim. They came and helped me. They didn't hurt me in any way. They didn't take me against my will. They didn't do anything negative or bad. All they did was help, follow out God's orders, and then they were gone. That's a benevolent being. That again is the difference between one and the other. When I compare and contrast the two, it's very easy for me to identify the good from the bad in that respect. But so that was really an amazing, amazing encounter. So I try to put some of those positive, amazing encounters in there, just because I want people to remember there may be some bad things out there, but there's some really, really good things out there too.
Yeah, that's incredible, and I'm so happy that you shared that, in light of everything, because yeah, it is. I mean, it is something that people are afraid of, and to know that there are these beings out there who are as powerful or more powerful. I would say more powerful is probably the more accurate way of describing them, who are equally able to intercede, right? Because that's something that's really, I mean, I hate to use that word frightening again, but that's what's so frightening, is that these beings can intercede at any point. You could be sleeping in the comfort of your home and be woken up in the middle of the night and taken deep underground. I mean, this is unsettling.
There needs to be permission, though. Remember, somewhere along the line, you or someone else has to have given permission.
Well, and let's get into that, because
break those permissions.
Yeah, how do we begin to break that? Because I think you've kind of, I don't know if I asked you directly yet, but how did you break that? And because whatever it was that had bonded you to these beings, happened much before you came into this, life, right? So how did you break it?
Well, it was learning about putting on the full armor of God from Ephesians 11 and 12, about that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and spirits and things that we can't necessarily always see, and realizing that there is a pecking order, there is a hierarchy, and Jesus is at the very top. And if you call on him, his authority is more than enough to stop them in their tracks. And someone like I'm going to put you in contact with her, but I had the book They Only Come Out at Night by Vicki Joy Anderson. She's like a sister to me. She's an amazing author. She's an expert in this field and in the different permissions and breaking those permissions that have been put on people's lives. I know that the lovely woman you had on, who was embroiled in the Mormon church, she just wrote down all those things and said, I break all these. That's enough. You can just pray about it and just say, Lord, break all these, any permissions, any agreements made for me, by me, known or unknown to me, that I pray that are not with you, God. I pray that you will break those, and they'll be broken. If you just pray it and believe it, that's pretty much it. But she's the real expert on that. Highly recommend getting that book or talking to her, or just even going online. There's so many resources out there. You can find her and me both on Instagram, so you can find more there too, and Facebook. Yeah, that's how I stopped it. And once I realized that I could call on the authority of Jesus and they couldn't take me anymore, they stopped. They didn't. And I've seen them outside my window, and I've been like, too close, I rebuke you, get the heck out of here, and because they can't come in anymore. They can't come near me. They can't take me. Right. The only, there's nothing they can do anymore. And it doesn't just work for me. It's worked for everyone I've talked to who's ever had this problem.
And I was about to say, before our interview, I've been listening to tons of different abduction stories, and just to kind of get my head in this area. And there's tons of cases where people, and I don't know, whether they were even all Christians, but there was one story where a guy, he wasn't a Christian, he didn't even really ever go to church or anything like that, never picked up the Bible, but he had this terrifying encounter, and something inside of him just compelled him to call out Jesus's name, and when he did, everything stopped, and he was kind of back, or maybe put back on the ground. Something really, I forget if it was a UFO that was picking him up or these beings that had confronted him. But when I heard that, I was like, wow, that's noteworthy to me, because a lot of researchers will try to explain that away and say like, oh, well, this person has such a strong belief in their mind that, that belief has power, and that emotional, power hit this being, or whatever, however they're going to make sense of it. But here's a person who didn't really even believe in any of it. He just kind of was compelled in that moment to say that. How do you explain that if there isn't this force out there protecting us, right?
Right. Yeah, because that's the beauty of having a loving creator. I mean, it's like the story of the prodigal son. I mean, think about it. If one of your kids, if for those of you out here there who are parents, if you got a kid who left home and decided they didn't want anything to do with you, and then came home and said, Mom, I still love you. I'm sorry. What are you going to do? You're going to grab that kid and hug him or her as hard as you can, you know? As soon as they call out for you, you better believe it. You're going to be there. And it's the same thing. We have a loving God. I mean, he loves us, and you don't have to have gone through all these very specific steps for him to love you. He just does. And you don't have to understand how it works. It just does.
Right.
And, so to call on Jesus' name, as long as you know that he is the authority, then that works, and that's the beauty of having a loving creator. That if you've fallen away or you don't know him, he's going to give you a chance to get to know him or find him or come back to him. In my case, I was falling away. I was living a life I was not proud of, but I didn't think twice about it until all of a sudden one day I woke up and I was just like, oh, and now, and then I fell on my knees and just repented it, because the world has a way of really making it hard to see when we're doing something bad or ugly or evil, and just really covering that up and making it okay. When you're in the world, everything's easy to a point until you have to pay the price. Like you said, there's always a price. There's always a price at the end. There's no price at the end of salvation. It's just, it's a bonus. You get a gift, the free gift of eternal life. So instead of paying a price, you're actually getting something.
Yeah. Well, I think that inherently is why this earth is so difficult. Like, to come here and to go through this physical experience, there are so many trap doors and so many easy ways to just kind of lose sight of our real spiritual potential and our mission here, right? And I think that's part of maybe even, and I know this might sound crazy, but I've had some guests on the show who explain these dark forces as having a role ultimately in the universe for pushing us towards the light by being there in the darkness. I mean, it sounds like kind of irrational on one point when you're like confronted with the evil, but in hindsight, do you feel that way yourself, that like this was kind of pushing you towards a better life?
There are biblical examples of when God says, to the angels, who wants to go and do this bad thing or this whatever, because sometimes that has to happen in order for people to understand the good. But and I'm not saying that God does bad things to people. That wasn't the story in the Bible at all. But yeah, I do think that that can have some merit, that something that comes across as not being very good, you go through those things. It's the trial by fire. It's the strengthening in the fire. It's like putting that steel in the fire and strengthening it over and over again, or the pruning of a tree. These things are hard to go through, but they ultimately, in the end, make you stronger and better and healthier and, and more grateful for the things that we do have. So I think that there's a lot to what you said. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and it feels like when you look at things from those terms, like, oh, well then being good, being bad, what's the point? I'll just do whatever I want, right? And I think that that's kind of, again, that trap door that humans are again and again confronted with. And we have tons of, instances in history where people do really terrible things. And yeah, I wonder in the afterlife, what happens next to those people. And I mean, I don't know how you feel about like reincarnation and things like that, but it does seem like these entities that are dark have lost any chance at going and ascending. Like it's almost like they've relegated themselves to that spot. Would you agree with that, or do you think that even these like negative gray, tall grays can go to heaven eventually?
Yeah, I mean, well, when we're talking about demons, they're okay, so they're the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, right? They've already been condemned to wander the earth until judgment and then be judged. And, I'm not God, so I don't have I only have the capacity to know what's written in the Bible and what I'm given, the information I'm given. And I don't even know that as well as, I could. Oh my gosh, I could study it my whole life and never know it as well as I would like to. But and then as far as the angelic beings, they chose to fall. They chose to leave God. Do they have a choice to go back? Well, the Bible basically tells us they don't, but I don't know that for sure. So I can't say either. I mean, our God is a compassionate and loving God, and he loves his creations. And he always seems to be giving opportunities and chances. He's always opening his arms and welcoming us back. So, based on what I know, he's a loving and forgiving God. And we live right now in a dispensation of grace. We're blessed to be in the time we are now because that's not going to last forever. When that's gone, then, that's going to be a hard time to live because you're not going to have all these chances that we have.
Mm, mm.
So it's, yeah, we're very blessed, and we don't realize how blessed we are, and we get away with a lot because of how much God loves us and because of his grace. But once you know better, then you have to do better. And that's where the change comes in. And once you know better and you really have God in your heart like that, you don't want to do those things anymore that are bad. So I think for someone doing those things, I don't know why people do the things that they do. I do think some people can be easily possessed or oppressed by demonic entities. And I think that can have a lot to do with it. But I don't know if you saw the movie Nefarious.
No.
Highly recommend that. You would really love it. But it's about a man who's a serial killer, who's possessed by a demonic entity.
Wow.
I highly recommend it. It's very interesting. And if you watch it, give me a call. We'll talk about it after.
All right. Well, we're at the hour and 30 mark, and this is usually
already. Okay.
This is usually when I edit and have time with the guest for like the supporters only. So like now the people who pay to listen to the show are going to be hearing, and the free audience will be hearing the part where I ask you like, oh, where can we find the book, yada yada. So I'm going to edit around, but so I guess we're kind of in the secret part of the podcast now. Although we do have a bunch of supporters, so people will hear this. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on like the end times? And because I have heard the perspective from other researchers in this field that these beings represent the apocalypse somehow, or like the end of days, and like they're kind of not necessarily like the four horsemen, but kind of like a precursor to this like sign that the end times are coming. What are your thoughts on that?
By these beings, you mean just the UFOs,
the grays, the demons, like their appearance in like more of like the main stage rather than just hidden in the dark.
So being hidden, yeah, because they've been around such a long time. I do think that we are getting to the end days because biblically it says it will be like in the days of Noah, and I feel like we're getting there because in the times of Noah, I think I mentioned earlier, there were the Nephilim, which they're doing again. There were mixing of species, which is happening again. I mean, there were the babies that were being sacrificed to Moloch, or and that's happening again. So we're seeing so many parallels to that time that I think that it's a pretty good guess that we're in the last days. But how long are the last days? I don't know. I personally am a pre-millennial. I believe that there is a rapture. I believe that God's church will be raptured up. However that happens remains to be seen. We don't know. I think that it will be an excuse will be, well, there's some kind of a alien intervention and that we were taken off for re-education or something like that. So I want a shirt that says, if someone tells you I've gone for re-education, don't believe them. But that's really kind of where I think that's going to happen. But then after that, we don't know how long it'll be until the tribulation period of the Bible would start. It could be generations. It could be 30, 40, 50, 60, 100 years. We just don't know. So imagine something like a rapture happens. You think that's going to be a big deal, right? Everyone's going to see that and maybe make some changes in their lives. Well, not necessarily, because I think there's going to be an excuse for it. And I think there's going to be enough generations that passed. I mean, my kids don't even know what 9/11 was. Well, they know, but they don't know what it was for me and our son, who was old enough to remember it, how it impacted us. Something that big, a couple generations away, a bunch of people disappearing is just, it's not going to impact them the same way. It's just going to be a part of history.
Right.
So, but I do think we're in the end times. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I was in second grade when 9/11 happened, and it's crazy to think that was 22 years ago. Now, I mean, anyone who's younger than 22, yeah, it's hard to.
You're right about that age where, yeah, I have a son about your age, and
Right.
yeah, he remembers it, but the younger one, she doesn't as much. She remembers it, but not really. She was in preschool. So
Well, and I notice, at least with what I'm able to see from the podcast analytics, that the conspiracy audience that at least is listening to my show is between the ages of 29 and 45. That's like the big demographic that we got. And I just learned about that yesterday. But it does seem like it's a group of people that were all exposed to that event while they were old enough to really, for it to file away somewhere for them to then, because I hear this time after time, when I talk to people around my age or older, that 9/11 was a big kind of wake up for them to get into all this stuff. I'm sure it was for you in some ways. And,
Oh yeah, 9/11, I think for a lot of people, I mean, granted, I was already based just because of how I was raised and what happened to me, not raised, but what happened to me as I was growing up. I already realized, hey, our government's doing stuff that nobody knows about, because, I saw government workers and working side by side with these entities.
Wow.
I saw humans working with these entities. So I knew from a very young age that, we're all being lied to.
Well, let me ask you about that, because you did describe the Nordic looking beings, but in what capacity did you see people that appeared to be like normal surface dwelling humans? Do you think that there are like deep government jobs where people get assigned to jobs like that?
Definitely.
Wow.
They were in the underground facilities, and they were never directly, well, never is not true. They weren't the ones that were usually directly doing like procedures or anything like that when I was awake. But they were always, some of them were in like lab coats, some of them were in military uniforms, some of them were in just these kind of muted, like beige tone smock type outfits, that they were just these androgynous outfits that they wore. Some of the entities and the humans, and they would be in the same outfit. It was weird. You could tell some of them were probably just there to sweep the floor, and some of them were some kind of doctors or something. So I don't know what everyone's jobs were, because I wasn't told any of that information. They don't answer a lot of questions. Let's put it that way. But they were there. They were humans with the aliens from as little as I can remember. And one thing I remember about being a kid was that there were always little kids there. Wherever they would take me, there would be other little kids. I remember sitting around tables with little kids. Some of them really seemed emotionally or mentally messed up. Some seemed fine. Some were just crying, or it was not a pleasant place. And most kids were unhappy, but some of us had just learned to go along with it. Um, and But yeah, there were always other humans around. It was never just straightforward alien entities.
Wow. Now, I don't know if know any of this, but feel free to say, I don't know, or take a guess. But do you think that there were, humans like people that were there full time, basically, like people that got abducted and then never returned?
I don't know that. No. My feeling on it, based on the way that I heard them talking to and some of the things that happened, and I write a little bit about this in the book, that some of these people who are working in these facilities didn't know what they were getting into until it was too late.
Wow.
And once you're working, I mean, you may know you're working on a high level or top secret project, and that might sound really exciting and interesting until you realize that you're working with these alien entities and people are being kidnapped and you can't tell anyone about it. And if you do, your family's going to be murdered in their sleep,
Right.
or they're going to kidnap your daughter and do the same things to her that they saw them doing to me, because I was utilized as a you don't want this to happen to your family kind of person on occasion.
Wow.
And let me tell you, I'm sure it was very convincing enough to keep people quiet. So I really don't think a lot of the people knew that they were going to end up there when they accepted whatever project they accepted. Right. And then once, like I said, once you're in it, you're pretty much stuck.
Right. Now, we are in the supporters only section, but
Okay.
feel free to not answer this. I don't know if you mentioned any locations in the book, but do you disclose where you grew up, and do you have a guess
sure.
on where these underground bases could have been? Like, did they feel really
Yeah.
far away, or maybe like local? Are there any suspicious areas where you grew up?
Yeah, I grew up in central and southern Ohio.
Okay.
My grandma's farm is on the Ohio River, and I talk about that in the book. We grew up playing on the ancient earthworks like the Serpent Mound in Peebles, Ohio, and Sight Mound, and all those crazy. Yeah, there was a lot of high strangeness at those places too. So,
Wow.
talk about opening portals and doorways. We were doing it all over the place. There were some very strange areas there that I learned about later, that absolutely could have been entryways into an underground. There's a place just up the road from where the farm was. I found out, I can't think of the name of it, and I didn't put it in the book, but it's something I'm going to try to do more research on
What's so
down the road. The
fascinating?
problem is that they don't give you, when you find something really cool and interesting like that, it's usually so well guarded that there's no way I'm going to get that information. But there is some underground tunnels in that area. If you look up Southern Ohio underground tunnels, you can probably find what I'm talking about.
Wow.
And then I know he's taken out west because there were times when I would be outside and it was very hot and very dry, and that's not what it was like where we grew up.
Right.
So I know some of them were out west. I just don't know where. And I do have a memory of sand, but we weren't at the beach. So
Right.
I, assuming most of that was out west, but I wasn't given specific information as to where I was most of the time.
Well, and that leads me to another question about time, but real briefly, I want to just comment on the Ohio thing because it's come up in my research. I live in New England, so I've been researching.
I live there.
Okay,
Where
yeah,
in New England are you?
Connecticut.
Okay.
Right
Yeah, I
in
lived in Boston and in Pennsylvania and in New Hampshire. I've lived
Okay.
all over New England
You probably
for
drove
short periods of time.
through my town, but yeah, now I live in the northwest corner of Connecticut, and
Connecticut's beautiful.
yeah, a lot of strange stuff around here. The stone structures, which kind of caught my interest, and they do connect to the mounds. But on a recent conversation I had on the podcast, we were looking into the, and I pronounced this wrong, so I'm going to do my best. Tuat de Danin. hopefully that's correct for my Irish audience. They were a group of supernatural beings in the Irish folklore that allegedly traveled from the other world using the mounds. So
Okay.
here you
Well, that
start.
makes, yeah, they
Yeah,
used the fairy mounds, right? Is that
right.
what they
Well,
traveled? Okay.
there are fairies connected to mounds, but they use the term burial mounds, so not just
Yes.
mounds that are associated with fairy, but I think the fairy folk are very much inextricably connected to all this. So yeah, and
Yes,
Ohio
sure.
is filled with mounds, as you pointed out, a lot of strange stuff there, and but you mentioned going out west, how like what was the length or duration of like your perception of time during these experiences? Was it very quick?
Um,
Obviously you talked about being like kind of like blacked out, so I imagine
mhm.
you don't remember time then, but like did you imagine like or remember like long distances, or
Yeah, it
was it
seemed like a long time when I would be gone. I don't remember traveling long, long distances. I remember the train that I would get on was really fast. Well, I called it the elevator, but the moving elevator. I mean, because I was a little kid, right? So, but it went really fast and it wasn't bumpy like a train. That's why I called it an elevator because
mm,
the trains I was familiar with would just clickety clackety click, were
mm-hmm,
on
right,
rails, and this thing was just like it moved like an elevator, but it was really fast. So I had no idea when it was on that how far I was going. Um, I just remember sitting there, being little, being cold. Sometimes I would have the foresight to, before I went to sleep, to have my blanket and I would just tuck it in. And like that way, I'd always have my little blanket with me. And I called it my cold blankie because I was always cold and I wanted that blanket. Everyone thought I called it that. No one knew why I called it that. That's why I called it that. Um, but because it was cold in those trains and they didn't care if I was cold or not, I was miserable. But time wise, time is definitely different somehow, especially when you're on the ships because you get back home and it doesn't seem like any times, if you don't know how much time if you've been asleep and they bring you back, and it was 3 a.m. when they took you and it's 5 a.m. when they brought you back or something like that. Um, but it seems like time work is different with them. It slows down. I think if you're crossing it all into different um like astral planes or something like that, then you're definitely going to deal with like when I had my out of body experience, there was no time,
mm, right,
not the way we understand it.
right, and that's
So
something
time is a
that's
different concept for them.
yeah, that's something that's mentioned in a lot of these experiences, especially out of body experiences. There's a different perception of time or even a different measurement. But I wonder if going underground can do the same thing, right? I mean, time we
Yeah, that's a
measure it
good.
with the sun and the moon, right? So I wonder if being inside of the earth slows that down somehow. I mean, again, I don't I don't know
I'm
enough
gonna
about
write that one
physics.
down because that is a really good question if that changes things.
Well,
um
you got to wonder with this technology or sorcery, how much of it is actually like happening on the physical plane and not in this, ethereal
yeah,
plane
that's
that they
something,
clearly
yeah.
have some higher understanding of, and maybe what we're seeing as technology is something altogether different because it's inherently from that different plane, but all
Yeah.
of that seems to be under the hierarchy of this higher force, this higher power, which has, the ability to intercede and say no and
Right.
stop you from experiencing this. And I mean, that to me is really like something that needs to be the highlight with a lot of this subject, because a lot of times people get into the alien topic and it's very doom sci-fi kind of like people
Yeah.
really can get warped into this false paradigm of what our universe is, and really what you're suggesting is that these aren't extraterrestrials in the sense that they come from other places. These are more like ultra
Yeah.
terrestrials, the way that
Yeah.
I don't know who coined that term, but
I don't know. I know there's a professor here at UT who did a paper on ultra terrestrials, but I can't remember if he's the one who coined the phrase or if somebody else did.
But essentially, the concept is that they're beings that have an ability to appear on this earth, but also go somewhere else, not necessarily in physical space, right? I think that's
Right.
kind of boiling it down. And
Right. And again, it comes back to, we're humans built for the earth, built within a specific set of physical laws and laws of physics and gravity and everything that we live by, that affect us, that we live within, but they're not hindered by those same rules or laws. They're not created from or for this earth. So if we try to put them into something that makes sense to our consciousness, it's just, our minds are just going to continue to be blown because it doesn't fit. They don't fit into our consciousness. They don't fit into our world. They are in a whole nother place with a whole nother set of rules and with physics and science and understanding that we're not going to get, not in this lifetime. We're not going to understand it ever.
Yeah, I think that's, and it's something that maybe it's for our betterment to not understand, right? In that sense, like,
Right.
It's not necessarily on our immediate path to enlightenment, to truth, to salvation, to understand these things. It's to overcome and not to be ignorant, but to also not get bogged down, right? I think that's a tricky thing with podcasts like this, and I got to be aware of it since I'm creating it, right? And like people listening, like, don't just listen to this stuff like and get addicted to hearing all this sensational stuff. Like, take this message and integrate it into your life in a productive way. And Karin, all the terrible things that unfortunately occurred to you or happened to you, they allowed for this amazing, I would call it like a revelation, and now you have this newfound ability to avoid those situations, right? I mean, there haven't been any abductions since, right?
Nope, not one. And I would not be telling the story, and I would not be sharing this story if it wasn't for the fact that I want to help people be able to get out of this. There's no benefit to me sticking my neck out like this, putting myself on the line, because people think you're crazy.
Well,
and not everyone. I'm telling you, the amount of support, the level of support and kindness I have received, I never expected. I really expected a lot more ridicule, and I do get ridicule, don't get me wrong, and I'm grateful that I don't get more than I do, but this isn't something you do for the money or the accolades. You don't make a lot of money writing a book, trust me. And you don't do this for the accolades. I'm doing it to help, because I want to make it okay for people to have a conversation about it with each other. And I want it to let people know that if it's happening to you, it doesn't have to keep happening. You can stop it.
Right.
There's a way to end it. I mean, these entities are not the end all be all most powerful entities in the universe. They're not. And they're not our benevolent space brothers. I mean, I really believe that's just the lie that they're propagating to try to get people on board and to get more and more people to go into their program and do whatever it is they want to do with them.
Well, and a lot of people who have alien encounters, experiences with UFOs, they mention being followed by men in black and having these sorts of encounters. Do you attribute your faith for maybe a reason why you've avoided that kind of stuff? Right? Unless I'm wrong.
I haven't completely avoided that kind of stuff.
Tell me about it. Yeah, have there been people?
I mean, I've had people ask me, are you sure that thing that happened in the hospital wasn't an attempt on your life? I mean, they didn't know you were going to come forward with all this. And I'm like, oh, gosh, I don't know. That could have easily been an attempt on my life.
Wow.
I've been followed. I've had all kinds of, weird thing happen, but nothing, they haven't come to my door and knocked on my door yet and said, stop it.
Right. Well, and I guess my question I was rounding about to is like, do you think that your faith in Christ is powerful enough to even rebuke these men in black? Because some men in black encounters that I've read, they don't sound like human beings at all. I mean, they really do sound like demons appearing as men in these suits. So I wonder if the same effect is possible, confronting them instead of with fear, with this faith.
If they are demons inhabiting something or someone, then yes, Jesus has the authority over that.
Right.
He, through us. I don't have the authority over another man's free will. God's given men free will. So while I do believe Jesus will protect me, and I do believe in protection and the angels and everything else, if someone else is to make an attempt on my life, I have faith that God's with me regardless. I mean, I've had a brain tumor disappear. I've had cars pull out in front of me. I don't know how I didn't hit them, but somehow I didn't hit them. I've had too many crazy things happen in the last couple of years for me to believe that there's not been a lot of divine intervention going on. So do I believe God's going to protect me? Heck yeah, I do, because he's been doing it all along. But, you know, if it's something goes on and God's like, it's all right, you've done everything I wanted you to do, and something like that happens and I get to go home and be with God, then I'm cool with that too. So,
yeah.
You know, not to be too que sera sera about it, but, you know, I'm comfortable and confident in my faith and my creator, and I know he loves me, and I know whatever happens in the end, it's all going to be good. So
Yeah.
it's all right.
I love that. And I'm glad I asked that, because it is like a theme and something you hear a lot with people who have these strange experiences, that they're followed and that, you know, they're threatened. And I wonder if, you know, because you broke those contracts, that maybe they're trying to, what they're trying to figure out what happened and why you're not on in the program anymore.
Well, I mean, like random cars pulling out in front of us for no reason in the middle of nowhere or something. You know, there are just too many times that's happened that I'm just like, okay, honey, you have to admit that's too many times for this to happen. You know, and
Well,
my husband's like, yeah, you're right.
And again,
so,
like,
yeah, we're just kind of on the lookout. But yeah, too many weird things. And then the brain tumor, come on.
Yeah.
That was crazy. That was only a year ago.
Well, I'm very sorry to hear that. And yeah, it's, you know, it's something that I think people, when they hear and learn about UFOs, maybe for the first time, they think it's like this fun experience they want to go and participate in. They want to see a UFO. But when you really like understand the people who have had interactions with these beings, you understand pretty quickly that this is not something you want to seek out. This is something you want to avoid. And oftentimes people have said these flying things are like omens to bad events, right? So, yeah,
I believe it. And there can be good ones out there. Don't get me wrong. I mean, the good angels and the fallen and the non-fallen, you know, are both using the same vehicles to get around.
Right.
I mean, but we don't know how to tell them apart. And if you're calling on them, you don't know what you're going to get. That's why we're not supposed to mess around with those things. I mean, it's dangerous. I don't recommend it. There's no guarantee what you're going to get or who you're going to come in contact with, and we're not equipped to deal with that. I mean, you know, I am not worried about them because I know that, you know, they're not the highest authority, but I've also instructed by my creator not to call on them. And there's so I'm not going to tempt fate either and go calling on them just so I can get a good picture and then, you know, put myself in harm's way. I'm not going to do that. No.
Right. Yeah.
Plus, I don't want them anywhere near me after everything I've been through. I'm still, you know, I still get triggered by them. I still can't look at pictures and things like that or watch movies about them.
Yeah. Well, we're at about.
And we didn't even get into my handler and stuff like that. So we'll have to, when you get the book, I bet you'll have more questions. And then I'm happy to come back and we can talk about it again because we've had so much to talk about. And I feel like the time just kind of flew by really, really fast today. So
yeah, it's been 2 hours. So we'll wind down and I'll ask you where folks can buy the book. But yeah, I'd love to have you join me again once I read the book because it is something that I think the audience is going to love, and I'm really grateful that you joined me today. So where can folks support you and reach out to you, pick up this book, and learn more?
And I will give you all the links, if I haven't already, for your show notes. But the book is called Stolen Seed, Evil Harvest. You cannot find it on Amazon yet. So I know everyone's been looking there for it. I've heard from a lot of people on that. I'm sorry, it's not there yet. It is on lamarzulli.net, though, exclusively. And that's lamarzulli.net, exclusively at lamarzulli.net. So you're getting, if you go to that website and go to the shop, you'll find it right there. It's on the first page. You can go to my website, which is Karin Wilkinson Author. It's Karin, KarinWilkinson, all I's in there, author.com. Or you can find me on Facebook under my name, or on Instagram under my name. And all of those have links to the website, all have links with how to get the book. All will have links to this interview and other interviews as well, as soon as I get everything updated. Anyway, so those are the easiest ways to get a hold of me. If you want to reach out to me on my website, you can send me a message. I will do my best to get back to you. I get a lot of messages, so it does take me some time, but I do absolutely try to get back to everyone who messages me. So I do get a lot of messages, but please reach out to me through my website if you have any questions, or you just want to share an experience, or you just want to feel like there's someone out there that knows how you feel and you've been through something like this. Please reach out. You can get to me through there as well.
I love that. Thank you. And yeah, I hope people do get in touch with you. And if you have had an experience like this, I hope this can help people, get through it, And Karin, God bless you for doing that. It is a hard road to walk down, and you've walked it, and now you're sharing your story, and we appreciate you for it. So with that, folks, please do support Karin. Check it out at lamarzulli.net. Go to the show notes to click the links and get right there right now. And until next time, folks, immerse yourself in the moment wherever you are in the now.